Do you or your athletes want to get faster? I am unable to count the amount of questions I get around what is best for training speed across the ages, whether it be for adolescents, adults, people who have spent a bit of time trying to get faster, and those who are new to it. While I try to give some advice based on my limited background both as an S&C and a below average sprinter, I decided it was time to reach out to a really experienced sprint coach. Kieran Gillespie runs the Sprint Science social media accounts across Instagram and Threads. He's an extensive background as a sprinter himself, specialising in 400 metre hurdles, but also coaching a number of sprinters from 60 metres right up to 400. We're going to look at what the main governing principles are to get speed, how you can introduce your players to them, how you can develop them if they have some exposure to speed beforehand, or some of the common mistakes coaches and athletes make when trying to get faster, and briefly touch on what are some of the best approaches when working with youth athletes. Super interesting conversation with a very knowledgeable and experienced coach. Something there for everyone to take away. Kieran, thank you very much for coming on. I think I need to preface this by saying you had your Sprint Lab podcast going for a while. I used to call this GAA Lab. I was forced to change to Coaches Lab. I completely robbed the name from you. So whether it's being inspired by or robbing, if I need to pay you any royalties, so be it. Now is your time to demand them. So do you want to give us a little bit of background there, touch on like how Sprint Lab and all the stuff you put up around sprinting came about, and what are some of the services you offer? We'll start with that stuff.
Yeah, so I set up my my Instagram page at Sprint Science. That's all one word, at Sprint Science, in 2021 now. So it was a long time ago. It was when I was at university, and I just started posting about stuff I had an opinion on in sprinting, sprint training, everything like that. And then when that gained a following, I kind of just went down that route as a career, half a career really. I'm now a sprints coach. I offer consultation programs, one-to-one coaching, remote coaching, all that kind of thing in the sprinting world. And I'm a teacher as well. Alongside that, I'm a maths teacher now, but I was a PE teacher. So yeah, that's where sort of my business has come from. But then me and a friend from my hometown athletics club, me and Alex, set up the Sprint Lab podcast tail end of last year, and we just cover useful topics in the world of sprinting, plyometrics, tendinopathies. We've done one on actual just how to train speed. We've done a few on tempo runs and all sorts of stuff, all sorts of topics. So we covered everything that we thought that someone getting into sprinting or even just a semi-trained sprinter would find useful to know, navigating their own training. Just kind of practical advice. It's nothing ridiculously kind of specific or something that might be a high barrier to understand. It's just stuff that you'd need to know navigating the world of sprint training.
I think that's important not to be too specific, because there would be very different contexts of people. Like, you are a sprinter, 400 metres is your event, isn't it?
400 metre hurdler, yeah.
It's like what a 400 metre hurdler does versus a 100 metre, 60 to 100 metre sprinter. They will, while it's still going out and running as fast as you can, it is still nuanced quite different.
Yeah, for definite. I do have an overlap with someone like a 60, 100 specialist. Like every week I do a max intent kind of sprint session, which all the 60 guys would do, all the 100 metre guys, 200 metre guys would do. Training your maximum velocity and developing your ceiling, as it were, is still important to trickle up to the longer sprints as well, because the further away that your max velocity is from the velocity you're trying to sustain in your event, the easier you're going to find it to run. It's like doing a bench press. If you increase your bench press from 100 to 120, then you're going to find bench pressing 80 kilos easier as a result. So it's that principle as well for the 400 hurdles.
So I want to jump in now, what actually makes people fast? And we just briefly touched on this. I was going to divide it into three categories. What's genetic, what's environmental, and then most importantly, what's trainable?
Yeah, so genetics, I don't think it's worth really dwelling on it, to be honest. It is what it is. You get the hand that you're dealt at the start of life, and then you just have to do with it what you will. Some people will have genetic limitations. Some people will have genetic advantages. It's an unfair game to some extent, but there's not a lot we can do about it. So I just throw my hands up and go, you know what? It's whatever. For the athletes that listen to this podcast, I ran a very unimpressive 8.4 seconds for a 60 meter sprint, like a flat sprint, when I was 17. And I didn't really pay too much heed to it. I just got cracking and got working on it. I wanted to run faster over what is now the 400-meter hurdles, and getting that 60-meter time has been getting that 60-meter time down has been part of the journey. But I didn't really, I didn't cry foul when I was running a lot slower than other people my age at the same kind of training experience. It was just a case of, right, I've got to get it down. So genetics, don't think it's worth dwelling on too much.
Genetics, like say, they do matter, but you just can't impact it in any way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it mattered a lot to me in terms of I was coming last in every short sprint race, but it wasn't worth crying about. So you got to focus on what you can affect. And now environmental, there is, I'd say, more of a psychological impact, environmental impact on speed development. It's like my sort of upbringing was, my dad was a 400-meter hurdler. He ran for Ireland. He was a very high level sprinter. And I probably wouldn't have gotten into athletics had it not been for him, because I didn't exactly have many things pushing me into athletics apart from him. I wasn't very good at it. But his sort of knowledge and expertise early on when I was being introduced to the sport was really helpful. He got me into hurdling, both sides of the body, hurdling on both legs and everything like that. I was well drilled in the technical aspect as I got older. I just wasn't physically very gifted. So, that can make or break someone's passion for the sport, I think, more than anything, environmental factors.
Yeah, because I'd seen it before. Was it like 8 of the last 10 100-meter world record holders were either the 4th child in a family of 5 or the 3rd child in a family of 4. So they spend a lot of their life chasing after others, but they're still they're faster than one younger sibling, and little things like that. And they do tend to come from certain areas, and I know that's a combination of genetics and environment, but they do still matter a bit.
Yeah, no, now you're saying that, I know I can think of a few examples that of really highly successful people that are just youngest siblings. Like Eddie Hall's one of them, I think. He's got 2 older brothers. Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that, but it's not something I've thought of before specifically to do with that. But yeah, I think environmental is important, but it's kind of that's another thing where you kind of deal with the cards you dealt with in life, don't you? Sometimes people don't have the best introductions to this world, so and there's a lot of people that have made it out of very, very unideal environmental situations, but still made it to be very successful. So I don't think it's a perfect correlation per se, but the trainable characteristics certainly have a much more manipulatable correlation with sprint performance.
Speaking of trainable, what's trainable then? What is actually trainable in this? In terms of like what we can as coaches or as athletes focus on that's within our control, and even like what are some of the key governing principles there? Now we might look at what's the best starting place for someone who maybe hasn't done specific speed work before.
Yeah, so speaking to an audience of games players, Gaelic players mainly, and people in other sports, even football, rugby, anything, a lot of these people will have fairly extensive strength training experience. So I usually, with games players, my advice is more on the technical side of speed training. So it's interesting. Whenever you're scrolling through Instagram, you see like 5 things you need to focus on to get faster as a something player or anything like. A lot of the compilations will start with something strength based, like a trap bar deadlift or a squat, or something to do with getting your strength up. And there's something in that. Like maximum strength is a limiting factor in sprint performance. If you can't apply a certain amount of force to the ground, then you're not going to run very fast. But that's not what most people in this context are lacking. I think of speed as it's a physical stressor, for sure. It's a neural stress. It's a structural kind of stress for the body as well. But it's a trainable skill. And just like kicking a football, this is a skill you can get better at over time with deliberate practice. A lot of people haven't focused on sprinting as fast as they can, as technically well as they can, and recovering really well from it and repeating a lot in their careers. I cannot think of a single example of like an amateur level like sportsman that or woman that does that deliberately very often. It's not really something they're allowed to do as part of a lot of teams' week to week practice. I don't think maximum speed, certainly in the UK, gets enough attention or ring fencing in team sport athletes training. But it's just not something that's got a lot of importance placed on it. The practicing the skill of sprinting.
I fell into the force trap for a long time. If I want to get faster, I have to get stronger. You know, reading all the Charlie Francis stuff, looking at Ben Johnson. Well, obviously get faster. We squat more, we trap bar more, and we try jump higher. But we're forgetting the actual sprinting part. Whereas I'm coming around more now thinking, if we just focus on speed and some hopping and jumping around that, I think that'll actually transfer over to the strength aspect more so than the strength to the speed. And I'm probably biased with by some of Matt Watson's work and stuff there. But I think if you limited your strength work a lot and went in on getting faster that way, I think there's more global benefits than going the opposite direction.
Yeah, and you don't really need to do an awful lot of working sets per week to get stronger. There's not, you don't have to train like a bodybuilder to push up your strength numbers, especially if you're sprinting at the same time. Because like I hinted at earlier, it's a massive neural stimulus sprinting. So your nervous system will develop considerably. If you're not been exposed to sprinting very much in the past, you're going to get a lot of immediate benefits from your body just being able to recruit more muscle fibers and just be able to like feel like you're trying harder in a sprint, be able to feel like you're actually running as fast as you possibly can. A lot of people haven't felt that since they're at school, and I find that if I ever work with beginners, they say to me like, I'm running as fast as I can, but it doesn't feel like I'm running as fast as I can, if you know what I mean. I just can't go any faster. And that limiting ceiling is what's holding people back a lot of the time. It's not the strength numbers, because you can apply a lot of force in as long a time window as you want. A lot of people can do that fine. But it's when you shorten that time window and increase the rate of force development and shorten the ground contact times that people really start to struggle.
And in terms of training that, is it like a starting point, just expose them to actually the opportunities to sprint, set up opportunities for intent, like in a race or whatever that way? Are you trying to just do that a bit first and then look to correct or improve, whatever the correct terminology there is around technique, or are you trying to bring them along together?
It's a tough question, because sprinting is a very demanding activity, and so that makes it a dangerous activity sometimes for certain people. I wouldn't recommend someone that hasn't sprinted since they were 18, if they were 35, to just go out and try and sprint as fast as they can right off the bat for 50 meters. It's not a wise idea. If you have a limited exposure to speed training, then your first port of call should not be to go out on a track in a set of spikes and race someone. I don't think that's wise. You need to make sure that firstly you're running or sprinting correctly, and that involves a trained eye, a coach, or even yourself upskilling yourself in terms of what to look for and recording yourself. But also just being sensible with progressing volume, intensity, and recovery time in relation to all this sort of stuff. It's just the same as if you're introducing anything else, except the body will be a lot more sensitive and delicate towards it. So a lot of people screw up training volume with speed training. I'd say literally the total volume, including acceleration, including all of your kind of reps within a session, not including your warm up, it's between 100 and 200 meters, really, total volume across all of your reps. And that's, as little as 2 by 50 meters or 3 by 40 meters, but up to, 4 or 5 times 40 or something like that. That's a sensible training load for a one-off speed session. And that involves, a minute and a half per 10 meters of running, rest intervals afterwards. And people they either get bored or they don't see the benefit of it at first, because the nervous system isn't used to those high outputs yet. But when it does kind of relax and allow your body to express speed a bit more effectively, you'll start to feel the benefit of those longer recovery times, because your body will just relax and allow itself to hit those higher speeds. Up until you give it the recovery time, it will limit itself to protect itself from injury.
It's a really good point around the recovery times. It's something I just struggle with working with teams. I'm trying to give them those longer recoveries, and they're just standing around looking at you being like, why aren't we doing more? Like, why aren't we running more? Why aren't we doing some ball work? Whereas now that they've gotten a bit faster, they're like, Now I see why we need this. But it actually took a bit of time to bring up. I suppose it's reducing the inhibition or whatever like that to allow themselves to go all out. That they're now seeing the benefit of that. And just in terms of like working with a GA team, to manage that volume, I'll generally look like starting off around 4 by flying 20. It helps manage the volume, and you progress to maybe 4 by 40 metres ish, all out. But it takes a while to progress up to that and give the long recovery and everything. And you're like, you be very careful of the volume, I find, with all out sprinting.
Yeah, 100%. And the first time someone's exposed to sprinting like that, especially if they haven't done it in a while, even if they're a trained GA athlete and they're used to running around, being used to sprinting is a little bit different. You don't want to then ruin the next 4 or 5 days of their training cycle. You know, you don't want to do that. So introducing maybe even just one max intent rep. If you're going to introduce sprinting all out to someone, just doing one properly is better than doing 5 mediocre ones and still just being sore for the next week.
I find when it comes to acceleration, then you can be not quite as, you don't have to be quite as safe with the volume. You still need to be, but I think it's a little bit more, you don't need to be as precise with it, say. Have you found similar?
Yeah, so during acceleration, the velocity's lower, ground contacts are longer. It's not quite as like a sharp stimulus as true maximum velocity training. So you can obviously do resisted runs to develop acceleration. You can do uphill sprints, and that's probably where I'd start as a beginner. I actually introduced, I dragged my girlfriend down the track a few months ago now. That her first sort of sprint session was in November, and she's been doing, like 2, 3, 4 times 40 meters kind of volume recently, but it's been a building process. First time she did a sprint session, she was whacked. Like her core was ruined, legs were sore for ages, and you don't want to do that to a games player that's got a game next week or next day, something like that. You can get to the point where you can do maximum velocity exposure directly before a game, and I'd say that's a really good time to do it because people are most fresh usually, unless your fixture congestion is through the roof. But you can get to the point where you can do extremely small doses consistently, regularly throughout a training cycle. And that's probably the best way to do it. But to get to that point, you need to have a period of time, ideally in an off season, where you get directed coaching and get your skill level up in terms of sprinting, because having sort of amassed training volume in a certain period of time is just going to be more useful to learn the skill. Once you've got the skill down to a basic level and you can just tweak beyond that, then you can move on to those microdoses through the microcycle.
And developing that skill level, what are some of your methods there? Bear in mind, you might be working one-on-one with someone, you can give them feedback. When you're working with a bit of a larger group, like I would lean heavily on wickets and straight leg bounds. I think tend to find the players get the most from those wickets in terms of getting that knee lift and a bit more intent in each step. And the straight leg bounds, a lot of them are like, it's the first time I've ever felt my hamstrings actually working. And that's why I tend to find those two work really well. What are some other ones you found work really well, or why do you find those two maybe tend to work well also?
Are you talking about like introduce stuff to introduce?
Yeah, to introduce, to start like improving their technical ability.
Yeah, drills are great, and I think the wickets and straight leg bounds are two examples of kind of unbalanced drills. That's drills where you're not necessarily supporting your center of mass the whole time, right? So, example of a balanced drill might be like an A skip, where you've always got a contact point under your center of mass, but straight leg bound you might not. I generally, if someone's got any type of experience with running or sprinting, would shift towards unbalanced drills, stuff that you're moving a bit quicker, and there's more of an emphasis on like, yeah, I've never felt my hamstrings before, like that kind of thing, right? You want to actually spark that stimulus of, right, I'm using the right muscles at the right time. There's like co-contractions happening that should be happening. It's a more specific like drill to the skill of sprinting itself. If someone's like a complete beginner, you might lean towards more balanced drills where they're not kind of fretting over whether they're going to fall over or injure themselves in the first hurdle. But I honestly, the value of just getting some slightly sub-maximal runs, but repeated and massed in one period of time is massively undervalued as well. I would hesitate to call it tempo work, because it's not even intensive tempo. It's just running in a fast, relaxed manner, but focusing on a certain single or maybe two cues at the same time, and just trying to nail repeated practice of a certain technical aspect. Um, it seems really simple. I'll just do lots of reps of slightly submax running, but like it's true. I would first, well, I mean, I've moved my warm up into basically doing zero kind of running drills or sprint specific drills over time, especially for a competition warm up, because the value of just doing run outs and run throughs is so high, and just focus on certain cues. But yeah, starting with kind of balanced drills for a beginner. We're talking like walking pace stuff, moving into unbalanced drills to introduce like certain technical elements you really want to nail, like straight leg runs are really great for like whipping from the hip. It's a famous cue. And then yeah, run outs where obviously you need a coach watching over this, where you're aware of what cues to apply and where the athlete's going wrong. But yeah, just getting reps in.
And what are your thoughts on dribbles? I've like some people use them a lot, some people never go near them. I'm a little torn on how much coaching is required to get the benefit from them, and my ability as a coach to actually cue that properly.
Yeah, I think in general they're a good thing. I don't think I think it's very hard to give an athlete dribbles to do and do damage to how they sprint, especially if they're doing them correctly. And if you're applying an intervention, it's 99% of the time it's not going to have a negative impact. It might have a positive impact. It's a decent gamble that you're going to be all right with it. I wouldn't say they're like the panacea for making everyone sprint correctly, but they're okay. I, it just depends on the context what someone's doing wrong. If someone's got a real problem with how they're cycling the foot, recovering into a new step, then dribbles will be great. But if they've not got that issue, then they don't probably bring as much value as they would do to a real technically advanced sprinter.
Yeah, I find them decent for exposing to a little bit of volume, or just get warmed up and ready to sprint, or try to get that contact to the ground right. I like doing because I'm mainly a hurling team, so we'll hold, you probably use a dowel, but hold a dowel in front or a little bit that way, just get a little bit more like contraction or control through the core and around the pelvis. But I see some people use them an awful lot, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm not convinced of getting a huge pile.
Yeah, for me as someone that has consistently trained as a sprinter for a while, I usually only use dribbles to like bleed into runouts. So I'd set the positions in a dribble and then try and maintain them through into a faster, more expansive kind of sprint. That's how I'd use them. I've used them for beginners, but once again, I don't tend to do more than sort of 2 or 3 reps of 20 meters in a warm up with them. It's very limited exposure. Uh, but like with anything, you can have limited exposure if the coaching's good with it, and the person's actually doing it correctly for those 60 meters in total that they might be dribbling for.
You mentioned there hills. I found for acceleration, now that I've like done a little bit of technical work, I'm getting an awful lot from sleds. I don't actually have access to hill. I wish I did with the group I'm currently working with. I think they are, if you have access to it, like really low hanging fruit, because they help both force wise and technically, and kind of force recovery because you have to walk back, you have to reset the sled or whatever like that. Have you found like similar, or are there other like is can you still get an awful lot without them, or are they just like so simple and effective it's worth going out of your way a little bit to get some form of resistance, or particularly around acceleration?
You can definitely get a lot out of training without ever touching a hill or a sled. Don't get me wrong, like they're not something you need to. If you're a sprint coach, listen to this and you're going, oh my god, I'm trying to coach a sprinter, but I just need a sled. I need this, or I need to take them to a hill that's 40 minutes away. It's really, really like, look, don't go out your way. You know what I mean? Don't break your back to get access to this sort of stuff. It's great if you have it. It's useful, and they're just an accessory movement. They are like the hack squat to the barbell back squat. You know what I mean? It's something similar that's great to use, that might extract a little bit more quality and technical drilling out of a movement, but like you can still push your back squat up just by back squatting. It really comes down to just preference a lot of the time. That hills are great because they lengthen ground contacts. Hills and sleds, sorry, I'm referring to both of these really. They slightly lengthen the ground contacts, and they let the athlete spend a little bit more time, very marginally more time, in certain positions and angles that they might not have the confidence to hit for such short periods of time in an unresisted sprint. But you can do the job without it. You can. It's just helpful to have.
Something I actually hadn't mentioned to you before, but I want to ask is around like, do you do much profiling around sprinters? And I'd usually seen this as like pushers and pullers. Is that too? Like, I've never actually seen you talk about that much, whereas I've seen a few other sprint coaches talk about it a lot. Is that something you've like give attention to, or do you think no, it's a bit different?
Yeah, I mean, so many athletes will get outcomes in different ways. Like it affects how I might expect someone to perform in a given situation. So if someone's really just springy and bouncy and they're built like a pencil and they get all of their power just from like summating, force into the ground over the course of a sprint, they take a long time to accelerate, they hit a really high velocity. I wouldn't expect them to be great in the gym. I just wouldn't expect it. It doesn't mean that um I would spend loads of time programming around that, or it just affects my expectations in a certain situation. I'd expect someone that's built like a pit bull and doesn't really last in a sprint over 80 meters to outperform them in the gym. I'd expect that. It affects my expectation more than it does my programming. Sure, if someone's got real weakness or deficits in a certain area, then I might adjust the focus of a training program or cycle or something like that. But sometimes chasing after weaknesses or deficits really sabotages someone's strengths. So it's a trade-off, really.
Yeah, no, I've an idea what you mean. Like I bang average sprinters, like I do bits, but like gym, I wouldn't be that good. The first 20 meters of a race, I'm brutal. But once I get up to top speed, I'm just, even in races, I notice myself, I just catch people and blow past. When I put on spikes, it makes a huge difference to what I can do versus when I'm in runners or anything like that. And I'm like, should I lean into that more and just really go for that, or should I just try drive up some of the strength work, try focus on the acceleration bit? Realistically, I should be training both anyway, shouldn't I?
Yeah. It just depends which fruit is lower hanging, basically, and if pulling one lever is going to sabotage the other. So yeah, it's hard to predict because you have to get the sort of magic ball out and trying to think, right, if I chase 5-10 extra kilos on my trap bar, like what's that going to do to elasticity or my technical like expression when I sprint or something like that. But that's when people really get to like the upper limit of their potential.
Yeah, it's still about managing overall fatigue and volume across the week and just where what buckets you're filling a little bit more than others. When it comes to like maybe some supplementary work on the track or on the pitch, how much would you consider leaning into like bounds, jumps, hops? Are they something to prime a bit going into your sprints, or something to build out volume afterwards, or can you dabble in a bit of both?
I think it depends on what cycle of training you're in. I think you can afford to do. So people love to ask me because my programming is quite like relatively low volumes and what you might get elsewhere with other coaches. Like what can I do for a supplementary day or a third day or an accessory day? Like can I do a plyometrics day or something like that? And it's just whether it fits into the picture of recovery because I really don't think it's worth doing something just because you can for the sake of it. If you can just rinse and extract more and more quality from what you're already doing. So if someone's got quite a full schedule already, if you're feeling quite beat up week after week in your training, yeah, it's great adding in a sprint day if you can, but then any more than that, like it might do more harm than good. If you have the space in your program, in an idealistic situation, I would spend an off season getting a couple of sprint exposures in a week, like a proper full complement speed exposure session, and then maybe doing like a session of plyometrics like bounds, skips, total hops, that kind of thing, like a dynamic session. Med ball throws are great as well. That's ideal. If someone's able to recover and do 2 to 3 exposures a week of that kind of thing, power development training, great. But in season, that's probably not going to happen. And you would shift probably to do your plyometric exposures as a warm-up strategy for your sprints. So you might only do 1 or 2 max velocity exposures in a session in season, but you might also spend 15 to 25 minutes doing some plyometric exposures, some bounding, some skipping, some hops, that kind of thing as a preparation for that. Because once, like I said earlier, once you have exposure to the skill and once you get technically quite good at the skill, then you can afford to do less practice at any given point because you're going to come in at a better level than you were when you were a beginner. You're going to come into that session already executing well. You might need to spend time as a beginner. You might need to spend 30 minutes, an hour actually practicing slightly sub-maximally to drill the skill element and to make sure the outputs are actually going in the right direction. And then once you're a bit better, ideally in season, you do less of it, but you do higher quality.
Yeah, I find similar. In season, the hops and the bounds and skips are good beforehand because they give the double benefit of some element of elastic development while also just preparing the body for the sprint starter to come. We say low hanging fruit a bit here. They're low enough in terms of hitting both for you at the same time. We've talked there about like some of the important things. So like finding a spot in the week where you're relatively fresh or as fresh as possible to actually sprint all out. Develop somewhat technically and get as much as you can from that. I would say for team sport you probably need somewhat of a balance between top speed and acceleration because it's not actually huge you hit top speed in the sport, but you do need to prepare for it when that moment comes, plus all the other CNS benefits that come from it. And they're probably some of your more important bits. We'll touch first of all, what are some mistakes you see sometimes sprinters make, but particularly those who try and apply traditional sprint stuff to team sports? It's maybe like, it's maybe not that worth your while or is possibly negating it a bit. And what are solutions around that?
I think there's a lot of people that, I mean, sort of myself included, because I've worked with games players before, but a lot of people move into the game space as sprint coaches and they kind of impress people by majoring in the minors. I think a lot of people hyper focus on very specific details that, yeah, you might focus on for a really advanced sprinter, but like at the end of the day, it's going to make a massive difference to someone that hasn't sprinted an awful lot before to just sprint and sprint well. And there's not a lot to that, not an awful lot to that. Guiding someone through it is a skilled practice, but if you're a sprints coach, then that's a basic expectation. You know, you just want to be accumulating pretty good technical exposure to high intensities and resting a lot. Now, the resting a lot part is where people go wrong very frequently. Like they just don't have the patience for it, or they actually are pressed for time. They're genuinely pressed for time in whatever cycle of training they're in. I appreciate like game sports, they do have really, really congested schedules. But you can intersperse sort of max output sprinting with really low intensity skill based practice that doesn't just use the same systems and still be fine. So if you had like a 2 hours with a team and you wanted to get some max velocity exposure in, then spending sort of 4 or 5 minutes at a time recovering from a 30-40 meter sprint wouldn't really make a lot of sense if you could just fill that time with something useful that wasn't anywhere near max output, and you could use the whole 2 hours instead of just having massive breaks in between everything and really chunking stuff and having people stood around, especially if it's cold through the winter. Just intersperse it with skill-based practice, and you keep people warm, but you won't tax the nervous system to any great extent.
Do you find sometimes team sport athletes would look across other sports, particularly like Olympics or World Athletics Championships time, they see a 400 metre sprint or hear some of their training involves a lot of 300s and try to do all out 300s, whereas realistically that's just massively fatiguing them, and you'd be far better off looking at the 60 metre sprinters and the long jumpers, seeing their training and applying that across. Not to copy it anyway, like there still are levels of, but it would be a better philosophy to follow than what a 400 metre runner does.
Yeah, so it's a good point. I hear a lot of people say that, like if our game's 80, 90 minutes, then a max speed element is going to be like I might only hit max speed once over the course of like 2-3 games. So why get that exposure and why push the ceiling up? Well, like maximum speed exposure also has a massive benefit to like endurance and
you said it well at the start where you said if you get your max bench press from 100 up to 120, 80 is so much easier. It's similar, like if you're running at 8 meters per second and you get your max speed from 9 to 9.4, like 8 meters per second is so much relatively easier if you're doing a lot of that.
A lot of the research into like late stage fitness in team sport athletes has found that one of the primary influences on that fitness later into a game was actually the how taxing the first in-game sprint was. So say someone's maximum velocity is 10 meters per second, and their first in-game sprint they had to move 8. Then that's not going to be all that taxing for them. It's going to feel like a fast jog, really. But if someone's maximum velocity is just over 8 meters per second, and their first in-game sprint was 8 meters per second, then they're going to be tanked for the next few minutes, and they're going to spend all that time in the game kind of always digging themselves out of the hole. Someone with a high top speed is never going to be in that hole in the first place, or is very rarely going to be in that hole. So the influence over just a single game means you're fresher later into a game. It means you don't find games as taxing, so you can turn around and recover for the next one quicker if your ceiling is higher. It has all these sort of trickle up benefits of like endurance related benefits just by fully resting and hitting the highest output possible. And it's something, that people overlook, having a bigger speed reserve or performance reserve.
The other element of that is where you may only hit your top speed once a game or once every couple of games. There's still often the moments that lead to the winning and losing of things. So let's not neglect what's still really, really important.
Yeah. I don't know what it's like in Gaelic, but in like football over here, there's this stereotype that your centre half, your defender is like this big, strong, sort of slow figure, and they're at the core of the defense, and they're just they're kind of just like limping around. They don't have any pace about them at all, and they're always just surviving against this pacey winger. And why does it have to be like that? Speed is so trainable. If someone has the potential to apply a lot of force, like a lot of these big, strong guys do, there's no reason why they can't be just as quick as anyone over 10, 20, 30 meters. Some of the discus throwers, shot putters, hammer throwers in athletics are scarily quick, and they can hit those high outputs. Some of them weigh up to about 130 kilos. Some of the throwers, 120, 130 kilos. So it's not like you can't move that quick at that kind of weight or height or anything like that. It's not an excuse. It's just a trainable characteristic.
No, that's really good. One of the last bits I wanted to round out to was just because I know you're a maths teacher in your day job and you're PE from PE background as well, and I always find that has a big impact across to a lot of the coaching I do, because if you want to get better at coaching, spend 10 years teaching PE in all girls school, you improve so many different things around what it takes to be a good coach. So just in terms of the teaching, how has that helped or made you even think about how you communicate different bits to athletes you're working with? But specifically as a maths teacher, because my wife, my mother and my father are or were all maths teachers, so numbers is a big part of that. Has that guided you in being a little bit more quantitative or numbers driven in your approach around this?
In terms of the numbers driven thing, I do measure 99% of reps, a time. I think it's just good to have that comparison, especially in the context of what weather conditions I did reps in and certain things like that. I love to accumulate data over time. I have training diaries right from when I first started sprinting, sprint training, all the way up to now, so I can compare what I did as a 300 meter rep with full recovery from when I was 18 versus now when I'm 25. That's definitely within me. I wouldn't say that I'm a complete nerd when it comes to that kind of thing. Some people are way more into measuring, assessment, everything like that than I am. I wouldn't say I'm that far on the spectrum. It's just it's definitely useful to compare sort of the quantitative aspect over time and see trends. But I wouldn't say it rules my training really. I do look a lot at is it really qualitative? Just how I'm running, how I'm technically applying force, because that's going to really affect how far I've got left to improve. How you're applying force and your expression of just where you're applying force relative to the track or the field or whatever, that really dictates how much you've got left to go. Because if someone's just spraying and praying, they're flailing around, limbs are all over the place, but they're really quick, they've not got as much potential left to improve as someone that's really technically well drilled, and all they've got to do is increase their physical outputs. But in terms of, sorry, what was the first question?
So the first was just being a teacher. How does that impact your coaching, or vice versa? I find it works both directions.
Yeah, I mean, ironically, I don't think I've done it well on this podcast, but teaching has probably impacted my coaching just by making the message that I'm trying to give an athlete a lot more concise. and just to use the fewest words possible to explain a certain concept. You know, it's really underrated how, because if you're an expert in a field, you can understand and filter information, relevant information, a lot better than someone that's a complete novice coming into it and being introduced to a load of new concepts. You can understand yourself, but if you're talking to a novice that doesn't know anything about what you're talking to them about yet, you need to be speaking the bare bones, relevant information. What do I need to know to do this rep? And then bank it and move on, because they haven't learned the basic concepts yet. So I think, yeah, speaking with concision and a clear message when you're working with athletes is really valuable, especially when it's games athletes or beginners. In terms of everything else, I think the value of practice and the value of practicing something to embed something in your long-term memory or your nervous system or the way that you move, just getting reps in is really, really important. The value of kind of slightly sub-maximal reps and running is underrated, I think, still, even for maximum speed development. Don't get me wrong, you need to expose yourself to like top-end max outputs to improve your speed. But while someone is technically poor, then giving them a few simple, easy to focus on cues and just letting them accumulate reps and exposures and giving them frequent feedback is something that's really, really, really valuable. If I'm teaching someone a concept, say I'm teaching Pythagoras to a bunch of, middle set year eights, and set 3 year 8, I'm not going to spend half an hour explaining the origins of the ratio between side lengths and a right angle triangle. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to tell them what the theorem is, and then I'm going to let them do a lot of questions and practice it and get lots of success. And that's exactly the approach I take with athletes. Is that right? I'm going to tell you exactly what to do, and then you're going to do it repeatedly a lot. And we can worry about the underlying principles and concepts afterwards. Once you understand the input that you do gets the output that I want. It's that concrete concept moving towards the abstract understanding of, okay, why am I actually getting success doing what I'm doing?
It's important as well, because that it gives the students in that example of Pythagoras theorem a little bit of confidence and comfort in what it is they're doing. Like, oh, I have a small degree of success here in figuring out the 3, 4, 5 bit here, or figuring out the opposite angle to the right angle. Now you have me. Now I have your attention. I have a bit of confidence in you as a teacher. I'm willing to get a little bit more. So when you do get into something a little bit more detailed or theoretical, they're with you. And it's the same with the sprinting. If they get minor improvements, like you said, to do a 60 metre in 8.6 and bring it down to even 8.2, you improve me. I'm ready to go the next bit here. I think that can be important.
Exactly, yeah, and that's looping back to what you said about rest intervals earlier in the podcast. Like, if you're telling someone, look, you got to stand around for 4 minutes here, and you got to wait until you're ready to do the next rep. You might not be out of breath anymore, but inside your body's not recovered yet. So you're going to wait until I tell you it's okay to do the next rep, and you're going to do it exactly how I tell you to do it. That requires trust. It's not a big deal. You just tell someone to stand around, but it does require buy-in for them to actually give that their best effort. And it's, yeah, exactly the same concept. You give someone a little nugget of success early on, and that'll stick with them. It's like, the first thing they told me to do, they were bang on about it, and they were right, and I actually got something from that was actionable and valuable that I could then take forward and use. And that's, yeah, it's so much better than, right, I'm the expert, I'm a sage, I'm a guru coming in, I'm going to lecture you for 40 minutes before the session about all these principles of speed and everything like that. That's great. You might know an awful lot, but you bored me 5 minutes in. So to be honest, I got far enough in life without any of this speed work nonsense, so I'm going to carry on. That's easy to slip into.
The other bit I find that teaching has helped coaching is I spend so much longer trying to have a clear objective around the session, and everything comes from that. Like, in this session, I want them to do 60 meters split across, as close as possible to max velocity, running with good technical ability, and everything is geared around that. So when it comes to actually session design and picking what it is you're doing, it's so much easier when you have that clear, like, North Star, because it filters out so much of what else you're doing. And similar for teaching, like if I was teaching, trying to say, like, I used to teach a bit of technical drawing, and I want them to do like orthographic projections. Like, 90% of technical drawing is gone because I want to just focus in on getting this concept of the elevation or the plan underneath the elevation and how we draw that there. It's similar then, I assume, like that you took from maths across to sprinting. And sometimes we aren't even as aware of stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. Because yeah, if someone's coming in completely fresh, they're new to a subject. You can't teach them everything in a small period. You've got to chunk things down quite a lot for a beginner to then master like certain basic concepts. To then for them to run later on, you got to walk before you can run with a lot of these things. And once you've got a lot of dots that are connectable in your own mind, then yeah, you can start to make jumps to other concepts yourself, and that's when you move from novice to expert. But before you are moving from novice to expert, you've got to get from zero to novice. So that's something that people are always in to some extent, because you're always a novice at something you just don't know a lot about already, and the limits of your understanding, that's where you're a novice. So you always have to treat yourself in that way a little bit.
Last point, Kieran, because I'm conscious you're in your midterm, you want to go enjoy yourself or do your side hustle, bit of both. I would have a lot of listeners, and a lot would actually get in contact via email and social media, who are parents or coaches of younger athletes, say late childhood, early adolescence. When it comes to developing speed, what are some of the simple but best approaches? Like sometimes I think technique can be a little overemphasized without opportunities to run fast at that age, particularly when there's so much growth going on and when adaptations are varying in terms of how athletes get them. So what would be some simple bits that the parents or the coaches could look at to use to get some reasonable benefits there?
I think one of the biggest misses that parents or coaches make is treating younger athletes like professionals too soon. So they miss the kind of enjoyment element to a lot of these things. Like if an athlete is fresh and healthy and feels like they're going to be successful in something that they do, then they're going to be motivated. You don't have to hammer them about being motivated at all. You shouldn't have to. You've got to leave them space to explore things themselves and to choose to do things, and give them the environment where they feel like they're making the positive choice by themselves. It's the harder way to do it, giving someone the options and them choosing the quote unquote right one. But a happy athlete is one that's going to be attacking training with the best possible intent and the best possible intentions. That's a big one for me. I see a lot of parents that unfortunately they try and like coach the child like they're already speaking to the 25-year-old version of them. It's not like that. You've got to cultivate sort of a, not curiosity, but like a desire to actually go and compete in a certain arena, and they've got to feel successful and feel worthy for doing that. And you've got to really, make not boost their ego, but make sure they feel good about themselves in that situation. And that's really important. I think giving them space to recover, space to breathe, space to choose. It's a really big one for me for younger athletes. And yeah, just extracting the highest quality possible from a little bit less training than you think you can handle is another general principle. Like, do a little bit less than you think you can handle, but do it like more intensely than you think you can handle.
Yep, really good. If there's any other bits of wisdom around speed and sprinting you feel is worth giving across here that I didn't ask about, let it fly here now, or if you want to re-emphasize any of your services or products, go for it here as well.
Yeah, I mean, I offer remote coaching options for people of all walks of life. I only work with adults in a remote situation because it doesn't tend to work too well with because they do so much. Kids under 18s. Like obviously, I'm a secondary school teacher. I teach and have taught PE right from 11 up to masters athletes. But yeah, in a remote sense, I only tend to work with adults. But I've got so many just free bits of advice on my Instagram account. I try and post the simplest, most actionable tips that are relevant to the most possible people in the sprinting world. It's at Sprint Science, all one word. So the first thing I would do is just check out that, and you won't pay a penny for that kind of thing. I always post stuff that comes across my mind when I'm training or when I'm competing against other people. It's just actionable tips, and then anything else to go from there. It's all on my Instagram to find. And yeah, any services you need. I'm happy to help people. Just send me a DM. I'm happy to signpost them to the right thing.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We might get you back on, and hopefully I'm still going in another year. So just see if there are any updates on your thinking, or to refresh people. Just to come on, let's go going again. A little bit of repetition can be great for the moment. No, thank you. That's excellent. Fair play.
No, I really appreciate the invite. It's been good.